Welcome into Duval Daily, presented by GenJag.com. I'm Jordan DeLuga. Thanks so much for tuning in here on Thursday, December 19th. Today is a bit of a game preview, if you will. Not the typical game preview. We haven't really been doing those around here because folks don't really care that much about the games at this point with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They just do not care very much, and it's hard to blame anyone. At this point in the season, the Jaguars look like they have a lame duck head coach. Should have a lame duck GM. We have no idea what the situation is there. They're 3-11. They are in position to have a top 10 draft pick at the very least in a season in which they were supposed to have the best football team that's ever been assembled in Duval County, right? So it's understandable why folks have checked out and they're moving on and they're more excited about the draft, free agency, the next head coach. Will there be a new GM? Will there be a new front? All these different things. Absolutely. I'm right there with you. But the Jaguars do have a game this weekend, and it's a game that, well, it's not going to impact the playoff picture in the AFC. It is going to have a major impact on the draft order. The Las Vegas Raiders are currently sitting atop the NFL draft. If the season ended today, the Las Vegas Raiders at 2-12 with a weaker strength of schedule than the New York Giants, not by much, but the Raiders' strength of schedule is 538, Giants is 550. The Raiders would have the first overall pick. The Jaguars at 3-11 with a strength of schedule of 483 would have the fourth overall pick. Now, if the Raiders beat the Jaguars in Vegas, they would have the same record, and the Jaguars would have a weaker strength of schedule, and the Jaguars would jump the Raiders. Now, having said that, I don't believe the Jaguars are going to lose to the Raiders. I also don't think the Giants are going to win another game. So you look at those two things, and you've got a recipe where it's looking like the Raiders and Giants probably will finish at the top when it comes to the draft order. Bottom of the standings, top of the draft order, right? You look at these two schedules, the Raiders, they don't have a lot of winnable games outside of this one this weekend. Some would certainly say it was winnable against the Jaguars. It is. The Jaguars are not a good football team, obviously. But the Raiders play the Jaguars, the Saints, and the Chargers. I believe that they're going to lose all those games. The Giants, who again are 2-12, they play the Atlanta Falcons with Michael Penix at quarterback, Indianapolis Colts, and Philadelphia Eagles. I think they're going to lose all those games. I do. So I think it's going to stay static at the top. You might see the Raiders fall behind the Giants. Giants jump ahead because their strength of schedules are so close. That could be the deciding factor there, but I don't expect either of those teams to win. I do, however, again, expect the Jaguars to win. I expect them to beat the Raiders, which if you're a fan of the Jaguars winning football games at this point in the season, that's great for you. If you're someone who's more worried about the future like myself, not the best. But the reason I think the Jaguars will beat the Raiders is I think the Raiders, coaching-wise, they're not one of the top groups in the league. And we know the Jaguars can lose to just about anyone, but when you look at their depth chart, I mean, they've been ravaged, absolutely ravaged by injuries. And the Jaguars on offense have been ravaged by injuries as well, right? But they still have Brian Thomas Jr. They still have their whole offensive line. They've still got Brenton Strange. They've still got Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne. The Raiders defensively are in a position where Kayvon Chason is somebody that's making plays for them. And good for him. Good for Kayvon. I am happy for him. But that's not a place you want to be at if you're the Raiders, because you had, going into the season, obviously Malcolm Kuntz, who's been out like all year, I believe. good football player, but Max Crosby, who's now also out for the rest of the year. Not to mention Christian Wilkins, who's also out for the year. Their three best defensive linemen are out. That is incredibly difficult to deal with for a football team, bottom line. And that was the strength of their team, was their defensive line. They spent a lot of money to have Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins there. They did a good job drafting Malcolm Kuntz a few years back, a couple years ago. Or he might have been an undrafted free agent. I can't remember. Either late round pick or undrafted free agent. But bringing in Malcolm Kuntz, right? That was the strength of their team. It no longer is. And obviously Tyree Wilson is still there, and they're trying to get the most out of him that they can, and he's improved. I still don't think he's like an impact player, but you look at the back end for their defense. I was a huge Trayvon Merrick fan. Nate Hobbs is a pretty decent player, but they've got injuries back there as well. Jack Jones can certainly be a pest as a corner, somebody who can pick off some passes. So maybe Mac Jones throws one to him. Could certainly see that. But this Raiders defense, I mean, you look at it, would any of the Raiders' current starters be starting for the Jaguars? Merrick is probably it. Trayvon Merrick is probably the only one on defense. So, and the Jaguars don't have a very good defense right now. I think that's more about coaching and less about talent, personally. But that's kind of how I view it. I don't think they have a very good defense, and I think that the Jaguars should be able to have a similar plan of attack that they had last week. Short stuff, get the ground game going a little bit if they can, and be able to be productive enough for the Jaguars defense to hold up against the Raiders offense. Now, the Raiders offensively, and look, I do think that the Raiders defense is well coached. I think Patrick Graham is their best coach on the football team. Patrick Graham, very good. Scott Turner, interim offensive coordinator. They've got injuries on offense too, right? They traded Devontae Adams, who had an absolute half against the Jaguars last week. But Gardner Minshew injured, so at quarterback, they've got maybe Aiden O'Connell, Desmond Ridder. They've got some talent on the offensive line. But the one area where you could really say they could potentially beat the Jaguars, it's Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. If the Jaguars can't cover the tight end, maybe the Jaguars do lose this game. But that's probably the only way they lose, in my opinion. And again, I'm not pulling for the Jags to win this game. Straight up, I'm not. I think that losing football games and having a better draft pick is more valuable at this time. And so if the Jags do lose this one, they could be sitting in a spot where they have the number 2 overall pick, assuming the Giants also lose. That would be a good spot to be in, because there's 2 quarterbacks right now that the draft world kind of views as those guys that probably will go at the top. It's Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. So if you're sitting at 2, there's a chance a team trades up to get one of those guys. I wouldn't. I've talked about that a lot. I would not. I don't think that I don't have a round 1 grade on either Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. I think Sanders has the ability to be a middle of the pack starter. If he's surrounded by a great supporting cast and a great offensive coordinator, I think he has a chance to be a borderline top 10-ish producer at the position. Not immediately, but over the course of a few years, getting to that point. Is that worthy of a first overall pick? I don't think so. And then Cam Ward, it's just the variance. Yes, the playmaking is there, the off script, the arm strength, all that good stuff, but he's inaccurate at times. He does not play in an NFL style offense at all. He doesn't do NFL ish things in terms of getting through his reads. Neither guy's all that big. I mean, they're both like 6'2", which isn't prohibitive, but when you're looking at the elite traits that either one brings to the table, Cam Ward has more of a ceiling, but a lower floor. And Shador just doesn't really have the highest ceiling in the world unless he just becomes an absolute assassin from within the pocket, which he's still got a long way to go with his pocket maneuvering, his pocket movement. He drifts way too often. I mean, they both got a long way to go. So again, we don't need to get into a huge debate about the quarterbacks here, but the Jaguars would be in a better position the higher their draft pick is. Better position to potentially trade out, acquire more draft capital, better position to acquire the best possible prospect that they can. So that's kind of how I'm looking at this. I think the Jaguars are just a more complete football team right now than the Raiders. And so I think they're going to win this football game. For them to lose, Brock Bowers has to have a monster game. And I think Mac Jones has to turn the ball over a couple times, which we know he is capable of doing, right? And you've also seen, Tank Bigsby with some ball security. You never know. The Jaguars are a 3-11 football team for a reason. There are no gimmies for them, but I think that this is the easiest game remaining on their schedule, and I expect them to win it. We'll see. Let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. If you enjoy the content, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Y'all have a good one.